They had been cropping me out of family photos for years, only to realize they had accidentally cut themselves out of their own inheritance. It sounds like a cold realization, but standing in my 40th floor office in downtown Chicago, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, it felt like the only truth left in my world. My sister Zoe had just posted a carousel of photos from our mother's 65th birthday celebration. The caption read, "3 generations of pure, undivided love." In the third photo, a sun-drenched shot of the family standing on the deck of the Lake Michigan estate, I could see the distinct, jagged edge of a navy blue silk sleeve on the far left. That was my arm. I had been standing right there, holding the cake, but Zoe had slid the crop tool just far enough to turn me into a ghost. I wasn't surprised. This had been the pattern for a decade. Since I moved to the city to climb the corporate ladder in finance, I had become the absent one, the cold one, the one who cared more about spreadsheets than blood. But I was also the one who quietly paid for the roof repairs and handled the property taxes through a blind trust Zoe didn't even know existed. I looked at the navy sleeve in the photo and felt something snap. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, clinical decision. I had 2 tabs open on my laptop. One was a florist's website where I was about to spend $400 on an "I'm sorry I couldn't make it" arrangement. The other was the back-end portal for my firm's estate audit software. I made my choice. I closed the florist tab. If I was going to be treated like a stranger, it was time to start acting like a professional. I initiated a deep dive audit of the Morgan Family Trust. Within an hour, I found the first red flag. The estate's primary holding, the Lake House, had been transferred into a new LLC 6 months ago. The signature on the transfer was my mother's, but the notary was a college friend of Zoe's. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been sending money to an account that was supposed to be a shared family fund, but the audit showed the funds were being diverted to a private equity account in Zoe's name. I realized then that my sister wasn't just erasing me from photos, she was systematically erasing my legal existence from the family legacy. I decided to drive home that night, uninvited, thinking that a face-to-face confrontation would force the truth out. I thought I could still save them from themselves. I was wrong. The drive to the lake house took 3 hours, and by the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple. The house was glowing, filled with the sounds of laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. I stood at the front door for a long minute, smoothing down my suit jacket. When I knocked, the silence that followed was deafening. Zoe opened the door, her face falling from a practiced social smile into a mask of pure irritation. She didn't invite me in. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her to keep the real family inside. "Kayla? What are you doing here?" "This isn't a good time," she whispered, her voice sharp as a razor. I told her I'd seen the photos, and I'd seen the filings. I told her I knew about the LLC. For a second, her eyes flickered with fear, but she recovered instantly. She laughed, a high, brittle sound that drew our mother and several cousins to the window. Zoe turned to them and then back to me, her voice suddenly loud and trembling with fake concern. "Kayla, we talked about this. You can't just show up demanding money every time your big city life hits a snag. Mom is celebrating her birthday, and you're here talking about deeds and audits? It's embarrassing." The betrayal was so sudden I couldn't breathe. My mother stepped out, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Zoe told me you were struggling, Kayla, but to ruin this night, it's too much. Please, just go back to Chicago." I tried to explain, tried to show them the documents on my phone, but Zoe stepped between us. She told the guests that I was unstable and obsessed with Dad's money ever since his passing. I was ushered toward my car by my Uncle Carl, the man whose medical bills I had secretly settled last year. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Zoe through the window, raising a glass of champagne. She looked directly at me and smiled. I was no longer just cropped out of a photo. I was an outcast, a villain in a story she had spent years writing. I felt a cold, hollow despair settle in my chest as I drove back to the city, the absent daughter who now had nothing left to lose. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a fever dream of spreadsheets and legal filings. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I worked. I used every favor I had in the world of corporate finance to pull the original trust documents my father had drafted before he died. I knew my father. He was a man who built things to last, a man who didn't trust easily. While Zoe was busy playing the part of the perfect daughter on social media, I was digging through the digital bedrock of our family's history. And that's when I found it. The shadow clause. My father had known Zoe's nature better than any of us. He had inserted a fallback provision into the trust that was so subtle, even a seasoned lawyer might miss it. The clause stated that if any beneficiary attempted to transfer the estate's physical assets into a private entity without the unanimous, notarized consent of all living heirs, the trust would trigger an automatic reversion of rights. It didn't just freeze the assets, it transferred full, 100% executive control to the heir who had been bypassed. By creating that secret LLC and forging the context of my renunciation, Zoe hadn't secured the house. She had tripped a silent alarm that handed me the keys to everything. I felt a surge of triumph, a momentary high that made me feel invincible. I prepared the paperwork to seize the accounts and change the locks. But then, the counterstrike came. I arrived at my office on Monday morning to find 2 police officers and a representative from my firm's ethics committee waiting for me. Zoe had filed a formal restraining order and a claim of elder abuse, alleging that I had been harassing our mother and attempting to coerce her into changing her will. She had used the scene I made at the birthday party as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. My firm suspended me on the spot, citing the reputational risk. I stood on the sidewalk outside my office building, my badge deactivated, my career in ruins, and my family calling me a predator. I was at the absolute bottom. I had the truth in my briefcase, but the world saw me as a monster. I sat in a small coffee shop across from my office for 4 hours, staring at a chipped mug. I thought about the photos, the sleeve of my dress, and the way my mother had looked at me on that porch. The shadow clause wasn't just a legal tool, it was my father's final message. "Kayla makes things last," he used to say. I realized then that I didn't need to fight Zoe's lies with more noise. I needed to let the machinery of the law do exactly what it was designed to do, quietly, efficiently, and without mercy. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't call a lawyer. I called the one person Zoe had forgotten to manipulate, the bank's lead compliance officer for the trust's holdings. I sent him the audit. I sent him the original trust document, and then I sent him the video I had recorded on my phone during my unstable outburst on the porch, a video that clearly showed Zoe admitting she knew I was auditing the LLC, proving she had knowledge of the illegal transfer. The response was immediate. The bank didn't care about family drama, they cared about fraud. By Friday morning, the LLC was dissolved. The lake house and all associated funds were transferred into a single account under my sole name. Zoe's credit cards, the ones tied to the family fund, were declined while she was at a high-end spa with our mother. I drove back to the lake house one last time. This time, I didn't knock. I had my own set of keys, and I had a team of movers with me. When I walked in, Zoe was screaming into her phone, surrounded by shopping bags. She froze when she saw me. "I'm calling the police, Kayla. You have a restraining order." I calmly handed her a folder. The restraining order was based on a fraudulent claim of elder abuse. My lawyers had it vacated 2 hours ago. However, I pointed to the movers, this house is now legally my private property. You have 60 minutes to pack your things. Mother can stay in the guest cottage, provided she signs a document acknowledging the reality of your accounting errors. Zoe's face went from pale to a sickly gray. She looked at our mother, who was standing in the hallway, looking small and confused. "You can't do this," Zoe whispered. "We're family." I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel any pain. "We were family," I said. "But you cropped me out, remember? You can't ask for a place at the table when you've spent a decade pretending the chair doesn't exist." I watched them leave. No tantrums, no drama, just a heavy, suffocating silence. They moved like ghosts through the house they thought they had stolen. Once they were gone, I walked into the living room and took down the framed photo from the birthday party. I opened the back of the frame and replaced it with the original, unedited version I had printed from my own camera. In this one, I wasn't just a sleeve. I was standing in the center, my father's driftwood heart necklace around my neck, smiling. I hung it back on the wall, perfectly centered. The house was finally quiet. I sat on the porch and watched the lake breathe, knowing that I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I had written myself back into my own story, and this time, the frame was exactly the right size.